for the speaker. Now, before we start, I just want to cover one little point. If you have any questions as the webinar progresses, then please put these into the chat box. And if we have some time at the end, I'll try and answer any questions that you may have. Right, let's get started. And what we'll do in this session is we look at things that may be very helpful for you before the test. And then we'll move on to look at individual parts of the test, each of the three sections, part 1, part 2, and part 3. And we'll have some advice, tips and tricks for you so that you can make the very best of your performance and maximize your score. Right. The first thing, the first few things I'm going to mention might just sound like very straightforward common sense, and they are. But it's remarkable how many candidates don't follow this advice. So,
yeah, David, good evening.
Hello. Now then, firstly, find out where your test center is in advance. So don't be ringing up on the morning of your test to ask how to get there. And plan your route. Know what the journey time will take you, bearing in mind that there might be traffic jams, there might be delays with public transport, and so on. You want to get to the test center with plenty of time. You don't want to be stressed. And if you get there late, it's very possible that they will cancel your test and you won't get a refund. Now then, at the test center, you will need to produce some identification documents. So find out in advance what they are and take them with you. All of that pretty straightforward and common sense, but like I say, many students don't seem to follow that. Right, before the test, this is very important, your warm-up. If you follow a sport, you follow football or athletics or something like that, athletes, they train hard for the match day or the event day. They don't just drive to the stadium, get out of the car, get changed and start playing. They perform a number of warm-up exercises before the match. You'll see footballers running down the touchline, or you'll see runners at the Olympics stretching before the race starts. And this is all to ensure that they can perform at an optimum level, that they're ready to start as soon as the whistle blows or the event begins. And your IELTS test should be very similar to that. It's really the same. So, for most test takers, English is not their first language. So most of their time, they're not thinking about English, talking in English, answering questions in English. So in the 24 hours before your test, it's very important to practice thinking and speaking in English so that you're ready to go as soon as your test begins. So read some English texts, listen to podcasts. Even when you're talking to your family, talk to them in English. Even if they can't reply to you, you might have to interpret, but at least this will get you thinking about your responses in English and using the language first. When you go for your test, the first time that you think about and speak in English should not be in the examination room. So the test day warm-up is particularly important for the speaking test. Okay, that's before the test. So let's look at what happens during the test and some tips for that. And we'll start at the beginning, always the best place to start, in part 1. The first question you'll be asked by the examiner is what your name is. This is not officially part of the test, but if you can introduce yourself properly in English, it's a good start. It sets a good tone. So something like, my name is Cristobal Enrique Colon, but you may call me Chris. And that is a good way of introducing yourself to the examiner. He will know that you fully understand that type of etiquette and courtesy. So the first proper question you may well get, about half of the time, the first question is, do you work or are you a student? Now, this rewrite requires a short answer, but that doesn't just mean a few words, not just student or I'm working. We should say a little bit more So the name of your school or university, the course that you're taking, or the job that you have and the place and company you work for, that's absolutely fine. Part one is the easiest part of the speaking test, so we really want to get off to a good start. If we can do this and you know that you've done well, it'll make you confident, get your confidence levels high for dealing with the more difficult parts of the test that will follow. Now, as you probably know, part one questions are on familiar topics and you're generally talking about yourself or your family or what you do, what you like, what you don't like. So in that respect, it's a little bit easier, in fact, quite a lot easier than the other parts of the test. So as we said, work or studies is an often first asked question. If it's not that, it will normally then be questions about where you live, about your hometown. And for each of these topics, we can sort of predict the type of questions we might get. So for studies, you might be asked what you like about your university or college or school. It might be about the buildings, it might be your classmates, it might be the teachers, it might be the subjects you study, it could be the campus, any of these things, but we need to talk about these particular issues and stand out. If it's a job, it might be about your work colleagues, the interview you took to get the job, an average day of work, lots of different things we can be asked, but they're relatively predictable. In terms of hometown questions, again, we'd normally be asked to talk a little bit about that. What is there at your town or city for the local people? What facilities are available? What is there for a tourist to visit? Do many tourists visit your place? That sort of thing. You might also be asked about changes. How has it changed over the years? What would you like to change about it? So again, we can predict the types of questions we might get and we can know the responses that we want to give. We can practice those again and again. Now in part one, there are lots of different topics that we can get. And some of these, they might be a little bit peculiar. Furniture, outer space, trees, dancing. But we should get at least one of the more familiar topics like movies or books or music or hobbies, something like that, which are a little bit easier. So, as part of your preparation for the test, you should know the who, what, and where. Who is your best friend? Which places do you like to visit? What's your favorite movie, type of music, book, type of food to eat, place to eat that food? All of these typical questions that ask me what you like and don't like. We should know what our responses are going to be. Once again, the first time you think about these things should not be in the examination room. Remember, we should vary our language as much as possible. Your vocabulary and grammar scores, which are worth 50% of the marks available, depend upon your range and your accuracy. Range being the different types of grammar structures and different words that you use. So ability to paraphrase is very important. And this is particularly prevalent in part one, because a number of the questions you might be asked are around this topic of what you like or don't like. And there are many, many candidates who use only that one verb, I like, to like something. I like this or I don't like that. So try and be a bit more inventive and vary your language. Use different verbs, combine your structures with adjectives and adverbs. For example, if you asked about movies and you say, I like action movies, not so good. If you said, for example, I find action movies very exciting and I really enjoy watching them, now that's much better. Now we've got two verbs, two adverbs of degree, a gerund and an adjective. So we've got lots of different types of speech and a complex sentence. So we're increasing both the grammar and vocabulary scores really quite easily simply by varying your language and understanding the different types of verbs that I can use to describe things that I like or don't like, as the case may be. Now, a good idea also for when you are about how often is to talk about the past, present, and the future. So you have an example of that. So how often do you go? Not as often as I used to. Last year, I think once a month. But nowadays, I'm so busy with studies that I only watch a movie at the cinema maybe once a month. Next year, when I have more time, I'll definitely go more often. So there we've got past tense verbs, present tense verbs, and future simple at the end. So three different verb tenses within the same two-sentence response, or sorry, three-sentence response. So that's very good for our score. Pretty easy to understand that structure and apply it to your practice. And the last point in part one is indeed that, practice. Now, many candidates fail to practice part one very much because it's the easiest part of the examination, and they spend more time on part two and part three. And you should, because they are the more difficult parts of the test. But that doesn't mean to completely neglect practice for part one. Like we said right at the beginning, it's important to get off to a very good start. Then you'll know that you're doing well and your confidence levels will soar, enabling you to do even better at part two and part three. Okay, so as for part two, what do we need to consider here? Now, part two obviously is where it gets a lot harder. The timing of this part is particularly important because this is the only part of the test that is not a conversation between you and the examiner. You will be given a topic card, you'll have 1 minute to prepare your answer, and then you need to speak for up to 2 minutes. And that can be quite difficult if you've not practiced it. How can I talk about the same topic for 2 minutes? It's quite a long time when it's only you talking in a second language. So you should practice a lot in part two, particularly on the timing. You're not allowed to take a watch or your phone into the examination room with you. So you need to be aware of when you're passing the 1 minute 30 mark, because you want to be wrapping this up at 1:40 and then delivering a concluding sentence. And that will allow you to finish your talk at about 1:45, 1:50, which is the perfect timing. Now, this next note saying fluency first, this is very important. There are many, many candidates who try and concentrate very hard on making no mistakes, getting all of the grammar right, using lots of different complicated fancy words if they can. And consequently, their speech pattern suffers from that. It's generally slow and broken. And this then seriously affects that part of the score. Fluency is worth 25% of your marks. Pronunciation, another 25%. Well, it's virtually impossible to get features of pronunciation into your speech pattern if you're speaking too slowly or in a broken speech pattern. So it's very important to really fix the fluency first. Make sure that your response flows smoothly in a conversational tone of speech and that you're fluent throughout. And if you do that, you will almost definitely find that you'll make fewer mistakes. It'll all just flow naturally. Now, the topic card. As we talk about this bit, I'll just move on to the next slide to show you a typical question. This is what you would get on your topic card. Many candidates are under the misapprehension that I have to talk about every single word that's on this card, and that's not the case. What you have to talk about is the top line. So in this example, you have to describe a place you have visited as a tourist. The prompts, the questions, the where, who, and what, and explain why here are simply there to help you with ideas. So they're good, they're useful, and you should use them if you can, but it's not absolutely essential to talk about each of those things. If one of the topic card questions is not relevant to your story, you can throw it out. You can substitute something else. You can add more in, or all of the above. And of course, the questions to think about are those that ask where, when, who, what, why, how. And that's really how we deal with that. So topic card, very useful, but we only have to talk about the very top line and not everything else that might be there. Planning your answer. We only have 1 minute. We can't do very much in 1 minute. So you can't write a script. We only have time to focus on keywords and ideas. So use the planning structure that works for you. If that's a mind map, or if that's a bullet list, or whatever it happens to be that you work with and that you get the most benefit from, that's how to plan it. But really only jot down your key ideas and particular words that help you plan and structure your answer. Now, structuring the answer. This is probably the most important part of part 2, because this is what enables you to talk fluently for the 2 minutes. Let's go back and look at the question again. What we mean by structure is the following. We need to know how to introduce the talk. And that doesn't mean reading back the words on the card. So we don't want to say, I'm going to describe a place that I visited as a tourist, because all you're doing there is reading the words from the card. You're not using any of your own words. So by the time you finish that sentence, you've scored 0. What we need to do is to paraphrase, and then you can already get a good head start on part 2 by showing that ability. So say something like, today I'd like to tell you about my trip to Paris last year, and especially my visit to Versailles Museum. Then you're saying exactly where you're going, or where you went to, and you're answering the question already. So that's a good start. As we said before there, use the prompts on the topic card where you can, but you can add and substitute other questions as well if that helps you. But try your best to get the most out of every part. Now here we've got where and who. And many candidates will say, I went to Paris with my family, which is 7 words, takes you like 1.5 seconds to deliver that. So we want to say a lot more than that. So for each of the topic card questions or the ones you substitute in place of them, think about what else I can say. Can I add another fact, detail, piece of information? Can I explain a reason why? Could I give an example? Can I say what happened when we did that to explain a consequence? So for example here, if we give my example of a trip to Paris to see Versailles, where the place is and who I went with, I should say why we chose that place, explain that. That probably gives me another 2 or 3 sentences. And why did I go with the people I went with? Was that my friends from work or college? Or was that my family? In which case, who was it? Was it only my parents? Was it my brothers and sisters? Was it boyfriends and girlfriends? What was it? So explain who you went with and why you chose that particular place. And then we get a lot more out of those questions. We possibly get several more sentences, 20, 30, 40 seconds out of that. And then think of, for this type of question on this one, I would think of 2 things, specific things that I did when I was there, and explain those in more detail. Say what I saw, what I could see, what I could hear, what I could smell, what I could taste, if appropriate. So lots of different things there. So that's our structure. We also need to finish. The last part of the structure is finishing with a good concluding sentence. And here we can get some very good extra grammar marks here by using a superlative and a recommendation. Very easy to practice the structure so you can get it right every time. So something like, all in all, this was one of the most memorable places I think I've ever visited. And if I get the chance to go again in the future, I will definitely do so. And then we have both a superlative and some future simple and a recommendation. Lots of good stuff in that one sentence. Now, the final part here is past, present, and future. And this is a really good technique for part 2. It enables you to vary the grammar structures by using verbs that are in the past, the present, and the future. So let's just demonstrate that. A question like this one is talking about a past event. So mostly your description, what you're saying, is going to be using past tense. But if you give your opinion of the place, say what it made you feel like, well, opinion uses present tense. So there we can get some present tense in there. And as I said earlier, if you use that example and that recommendation and thought for the future in your concluding sentence, you're getting in some future simple as well. Let's look at a second example. Describe a useful electronic device that you own. Well, here we're using mainly present tense. This is set in the present. It's asking you to describe something that you own now and what you use it for. So what I could also say is, how long have I had it? Well, maybe I'll add in there when I bought it and why I bought it. Maybe I got this as a present or a gift for a birthday or something. If I didn't, I can say that I did. That's fine. And that then uses some past tense. We can maybe get 2 or 3 sentences in there. And again, we can speculate for the future in the same way. I'm sure I have this for a long time to come, for example. So that brings us to the end of our brief notes here on part 2. So let's move on to part 3. Now, part 3 is the hardest part of the test. And I'm often asked, why is that so? And the answer is because it's designed to be. It is the hardest part because that's just the way it is. The test gets progressively harder as we go through it. Now, once again, fluency is the key here. If you show too much hesitation, then this will seriously affect that score. The questions here are generally more difficult as well. They call for generalized answers. They maybe ask you to make comparisons and definitely to give your opinion. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing is we need to extend our answers. In part 3, we're looking for, or the examiner is looking for, a little more detail than in part 1. So we need to aim for 3 or 4 sentences and answers of about 30 seconds in duration. So this doesn't mean talking forever, but it does mean giving reasons for your opinion or an example to support it. And make sure you don't give a really short answer. Always give an answer. The worst thing we can do is to say nothing. Now, the main problem is not knowing what to say sometimes. So what do I say when I don't know what to say? Well, there are a few techniques that we can adapt or adopt for this. If you're asked a question that you don't really know anything about, well, we do have to answer the question, obviously. We can't just say, no idea on that one, next question, please. We do have to give some form of answer. Now, you can ask the examiner 2 types of question. You can ask for a question to be repeated. And this is a good idea if you can't think of what to say, because the examiner then has to repeat the question to you, and it gives you a little bit more time to think about how you might respond. So there we buy ourselves a few extra seconds of thinking time before you start. A second question you can ask is for the meaning of a word. Sometimes we might be asked a question like, one that particularly comes to mind is society today becoming increasingly materialistic? If you don't know what that word means, you should ask, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, or I don't understand that last word. And then the examiner can explain that to you. And that gives you a little bit more time as well. Now, other things we can say to give a prompt response. We must give a prompt response. This means answering within 5 seconds of the examiner finishing the question. So if you're not sure, say exactly that. I'm not sure. This is a topic I know little about, but I guess it might be. Now, you have to say something at the end of those words, but at least you're starting promptly and you're giving yourself a few more seconds. You've got to think as you speak, but you're giving yourself a few more seconds, having made the response initially, to think of how you might then continue at the end of those general words. Okay? Now, No need to panic about this. This is the worst thing we can do. Many students do this. They panic, they stop, they search for words. And this is the worst thing you can do because this is how your fluency score will nosedive. So if you prepare correctly, you'll be able to manage and cope with all of these topics. A key thing, maybe the most important thing for part 3, is to identify and understand the question types. So let's have a look at those now. There are not too many of them. There are 4 broad categories and a couple of subcategories of the different questions we might get. So if we know how to identify each question, we can give the very best response for each one that the examiner is expecting. If we know how the examiner wishes us to answer, what he needs to give you a high score, then you can do just that. General questions is the first one. You will get at least one of these, and they are asked in a general way, so they require a general answer. Let's take an example of sports. In part 1, I might ask you, which sports do you like? You're answering about yourself. What do you like to play or watch? In part 3, that same topic, the question would be asked in this way. Which sports are popular where you live? Now here, you're not talking about what you do, what you play, what you like. You asked about what is popular where you live. So what do most people do in your country? Which sport is the most popular for most of the people? That's how we need to answer. So we need to be able to understand how we give a general answer, which words we use to generalize, and what the best method is of answering that type of question. Opinion-based questions form the majority of the ones we'll be asked. We get 2 or 3, even 4 opinion-based questions of a few different types. Some are basic opinion-based things asking you what you think of something. So should the government increase tax on tobacco products? Something like that. That's asking you for your basic opinion on that particular question. Some are phrased in the way of alternatives. So what do you think is more important for a city? An art center or a museum? There we are. Now we don't have to answer that. We should say both. And some might ask you to speculate for the future. What do you think will happen in the future? So what types of gadgets might be popular in the next few years? That sort of thing. Comparison questions. Two types. Some ask you to compare today with the past, and some ask you to look at differences and similarities. So what is the difference between studying in a group or studying on your own? What is the difference between classrooms today and classrooms in the past? About this topic. We're asking you to compare different things. And we probably will get one of these types of questions sometimes. Occasionally, not every test, but occasionally we also get a question asking about cause and effect. Why does something happen and what's the impact of that? So why do maybe something about air pollution? What is the cause of air pollution in major cities? What is the impact of that for the people and for society? So these are the type of questions we can get. We should know how to identify them, so we know exactly how it's being asked, and therefore the very best technique for answering each and every one of them. Now, just a word about what we offer here at Red Fox in terms of our IELTS courses and assistance. We have a series of webinars that we're rolling out over the remaining weeks of this year. We also have self-study products that you can buy from our website. We have online courses, either individual or group classes, and we can help you with mock tests and assessments. We can assess to make sure which type of course you need, the level that you need. Whenever you buy from us, what you can expect is expert guidance and specialist. All of the materials that you will get have been originally written by former IELTS examiner. You get videos, worksheets, practice questions, administrative support from our excellent team. Okay, there we are. If we have any questions, now is the time. Well, I have one question which is asking me, should I make eye contact with the examiner? Well, I wouldn't stare at him like all the time because that would freak you out, wouldn't it? But also don't look down at the floor all of the time either, because then you'll probably give poor answers and not be very confident. So just be yourself, be natural, try and engage with the examiner, and think of it as a conversation with one of your friends at the coffee shop. If you can have that mentality, you will definitely do better in your test. Okay, that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for attending. And I hope we see you very soon as a Red Fox IELTS student. Bye-bye for now.